told me, last night I saw a movie given a 4-star review by a major newspaper. There must have been 50 people shot up in the movie, and I'll bet it will be on home box office or Showtime soon. Or he might have added, on one of the broadcast networks. There are many causes for violence in our society. We are doing an inadequate job in dealing with most of them, including television violence. If this industry does the right thing, we will continue to inch toward more responsible conduct. I want that trend to continue. If we do, the statistical data on crimes of violence will not suddenly plunge, but in 15 years we will have a society measurably less violent. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll go to some questions from the floor that have been prepared for you. Senator, last June you appeared with heads of the 4 major television networks when they announced plans to start showing warnings on violent prime-time shows to help parents protect their children. But with the fall television season opening, the networks say none of their series, old or new, will display violence advisories because they say they're not violent. Is the new season so violent-free that no warnings are needed? Have the networks gone back on their word given to you, and if so, what do you think should be done about it?
Well, it is not quite as grim as is suggested. There have now been 9 movies on which the cautionary words for parents have appeared. There will be one series on ABC that will have the advisory, and there may be more on other networks. So again, we're inching ahead. Overall, the programming will be less violent. And I have to make an exception here again for the docudramas. There we still have some work to do.
Representative Ed Markey thinks all TV sets should come equipped with a computer chip that would enable parents to block shows that are violent. Do you support the so-called V-chip idea?
I'm not opposed to the TV chip idea, but frankly, it's not an answer to our problem. The difficulty with the TV chip idea is, first of all, most homes have more than one television set. Second, children are very ingenious on technical things. And we all know that. I can't even record a program on my VHS, I hate to admit here. But when we need something done, we call upon one of our 2 children to get something like that done. There are other problems with that as the solution. And again, I'm not opposed to it, but it is not a substitute for changing the content, because the very homes that need this the most are the very homes where they will not have that chip. And then finally, when Johnny and Jane, your children, come up to you and say, "Can I go and play at the neighbors?" You're a pretty tough parent if you will always say, "No, you can't go and play at the neighbors." And then when Johnny and Jane come back and say, "You should see what we saw on television." So the chip is, I am not opposed to it, but I don't see this as the answer to our problem.
What has been the practical political fallout from your crusade? Have you lost endorsements? Have you lost PAC money from the studios or the networks?
I frankly don't know that there is any negative fallout politically. Incidentally, when talking about the TV chip, this has been advanced by Congressman Ed Markey, and he's one of a number who have really done good work. I don't mean this to be negative in the good work that he has done. Frankly, one of the reasons that so many people are coming aboard on this and so many bills have been introduced, and I suppose at least 10 senators have talked to me about other bills they're thinking about introducing, is that you have a confluence of just kind of intuitive belief that this television violence does harm, plus the research, and now you have these 3 public opinion polls. So I don't think anyone loses any points politically in coming out. But let me add, I haven't done this for political reasons. And I had a reporter the other day said, how come you're jumping on the bandwagon on television violence? I've been pushing this for some years when no one was paying attention to it.
2 questions related and combined. TV may glorify or desensitize violence, but clearly the social problems in the United States run deeper. Otherwise, Canada, which sees almost all U.S. TV shows, would have the same problems that we do. Beyond monitoring TV violence, what should our priorities be in the effort to reduce violence in our society? And along the same veins, but a little more abrupt, Jack Valenti said yesterday that if you cut the wires on every TV set in the United States, you will not find street violence in the United States diminished.
Well, I'm willing to take a test on that. The answer, of course, in Canada, you have very different regulations on a number of things. You have a great many weapons in Canada, but you also have rules on, you have a 28-day waiting period to get a gun, much stricter rules on who can become a gun dealer. So the city of Chicago last year had 927 deaths by firearms, 4.5 times as many as all of Canada. Toronto, roughly the same population as Chicago, had 17 deaths by firearms. And I am hoping, and incidentally, some representatives of the National Rifle Association are here. I'm hoping that we may be able to work with them on something on gun dealers, where they acknowledge that something needs to be done. While they and I have been on opposite sides on a great many issues, this is one where I hope we can work together. But it is interesting, as I got into this whole issue, that Brian Mulroney, who was then the Prime Minister of Canada, called me and said, we're very much concerned about what you're doing. We're making progress on acid rain when you do harm to our bodies, but we don't seem to be making progress on TV violence where you're harming our minds. I think that is clear. Then the second question, what should we be doing? I think we have to pay attention to the problems of poverty, as was suggested in the question. There's no reason that our society should tolerate the kind of unemployment and lack of quality schools that exist in too many places. 1 out of 5 children in America lives in poverty. There's no other Western country that has that kind of a record of any major industrial country. I also believe in, my friends from the National Rifle Association differ with me on this. I think we have to have a waiting period on weapons, and I think we simply have to outlaw certain weapons, like the Tech-9 that I mentioned in my prepared remarks. Gene and I live down in southern Illinois. Our home is right next to the Shawnee National Forest. We have 12 acres out in the country. We're around hunters all the time. Most days when I'm home, and I'm not home very often, I see more deer than people, literally. I've never seen a hunter with an Uzi or an AK-47. You know, I want to see that responsible citizens can have guns. But I think there are certain weapons that we simply ought to outlaw in our society.
You will reportedly introduce legislation to create a National Privacy Protection Board. Would you describe your motivation and the charter that you envision for the board?
Well, I hadn't intended to announce it here today, but I will be introducing legislation for a National Privacy Board that, and the basic aim is to look at what is happening in this new world of computers and everything else that we have. Many nations have privacy boards of one kind or another. They have different names. We do not. And there really is an intrusion into the privacy of the lives of many of us, a much greater intrusion than most people realize. And I think having some kind of a monitoring board that says, are we really protecting the privacy of American citizens as we ought to? There is an implied right of privacy in the Constitution, I believe. We have had nominees before us who don't share that belief. But when you look at the requirement that you have to have a specific affidavit to go into your home to search for something, when you look at the requirement in the Constitution that says you can't have troops quartered in your home or be forced to have troops quartered in your home, and then a little known and little paid attention to amendment that is, I think, one of the really great amendments in the Bill of Rights. When Madison was talking about the Bill of Rights, he wrote to Hamilton, and Hamilton responded and said, if you spell out these are the rights of people, there will be people who will say these are the only rights they have. And so Madison added the 9th Amendment, and it says, other rights not spelled out here are reserved to the people. I think that, by implication, when you take with the whole spirit of the Constitution, suggests that we have a right of privacy.
Who would appoint, and what would be the makeup of this independent monitoring committee? How would it be appointed?
I have not spelled out. The independent monitoring committee now applies to TV. Now we're not this other matter that we just mentioned. I have simply suggested to the industry that you put together a committee. It has to be respected. And I suggested in my speech in Los Angeles to the executives out there that name some, I just picked 3 names out of the air: Walter Cronkite, John Chancellor, or Newt Minow, the former chairman of the FCC. Someone who is respected, who knows the business, who isn't going to be on some kind of a vendetta against the industry, but who can once a year report, this is what's happening on NBC, this is what's happening on CBS, this is what's happening on HBO, this is what's happening during the hours when children watch the most. And if we have that annual monitoring report, I think we will see to it that we have an improvement in our television. My concern is, because of the pressure from a variety of sources now, we are going to have a lessening of TV violence this fall. But that a year from now and 2 years from now, we're going to be back up where we were before.
Hollywood celebrities often get involved in social causes. Which television or movie personalities have spoken out on TV violence?
Not very many. I would add there are some who have volunteered to me now that they would like to help. One was at the ceremony the other day at the White House at the signing and came up to me and indicated that he would like to be of assistance. I think there are others out there who are willing to stand up, but we need more in the industry to stand up. And it's very interesting, this is not an attack on the industry, interesting that the Screen Actors Guild years ago had a resolution, they've had several resolutions since, saying we have to reduce the amount of violence on the screen. Within the industry, there is an acknowledgement by some that this is a problem. The difficulty is the account book gets in the way of our sense of social responsibility.
How does what you're doing on regard to violence on television and entertainment being assisted by Attorney General Janet Reno and Donna Shalala, HHS?
I have not discussed this with the Secretary of HHS, Donna Shalala, but I have discussed it with Janet Reno. I have discussed it with others in the administration. And I was told by a member of my staff today that last night, or just recently, Secretary of Education Dick Riley made a speech in which he referred to this. There is, and the President has referred to this, even I noticed the Pope in flying to Denver in talking to reporters made a reference to the problem that television violence is causing. There is kind of an intuitive belief on the part of most people that this is really causing harm. What is not known is that there is solid research to back that intuitive belief. We're a little bit where we were back before the Surgeon General warned us about cigarettes. We all kind of knew that cigarettes did harm, but and if we were polled, we would have said that they did harm, but we didn't have that specific warning. In fact, the Surgeon General of the United States has on 2 or possibly 3 occasions given specific warnings on this. The National Institute of Mental Health has, but it has received virtually no attention. That's why I think we need to get that message. And even this simple advisory that I have suggested that TV stations use, warning, watching too much television violence may be harmful, that is a way of buttressing that intuitive belief.
The questioner asks, Senator, is there a favorite film of yours that, by your own standards, is truly violent, such as Spartacus or Ben-Hur?
I'm going to stay out of this field. As you may note in my speech, I eliminated any references to specific shows, which show it was that got the Tech 9 on, and which children's show it was. I have generally avoided naming movies or shows or anything else. I think I'm safer not getting onto that thin ice.
Like Michael Dukakis, aren't you one of those card-carrying members of the ACLU? How does this square with your efforts on violence in television?
I am a member of the American Civil Liberties Union, as George Bush says, a card-carrying member of the American Civil Liberties Union. I used to be on the state board in Illinois, and I am proud of that affiliation. I want to defend the First Amendment, but I believe that it is not inconsistent to be a believer in the First Amendment and also to face up to problems we have in our society. After I had the first experience in this motel room, and I called my staff and says there has to be research somewhere on what happens to children, and then I learned there was all kinds of research, and we had all this evidence. I called a meeting of representatives of the TV industry in my office and said, I'd like you to establish standards because I don't want to have censorship, but we have to recognize we have a problem. And the vice president of one of the networks said, well, we've done research that shows there doesn't do any harm to have television violence. And I said, you remind me of the Tobacco Research Institute people who come in here and say they have research showing that cigarettes don't do any harm. I said, there's no question about the harm. The question is, how do we in a free society deal with it? And so I have refrained up to this point in asking for any kind of action by the FCC or anyone else. And I would like to avoid any kind of governmental action. But I have to add, this is a serious problem. And the industry has to recognize it is a serious problem. And there has to be some kind of response that is beyond what we have had now. I am pleased they have some voluntary standards that they have agreed to. They came to me last December with some standards that they have agreed to. And that's an improvement, though I have to add some of the standards are a little spongy, like no gratuitous violence. That's what is gratuitous and what isn't. But I think we need that monitoring board. I think that's the key that can really say we're going to do something into the future that is meaningful.
What is your stand on another aspect of violence in popular culture,